Terrell Calder and Lindsay McIntyre to discuss their films Beneath, We Are All Different, and Nuevo Rico that are screening here at the imagineNATIVE Film and Media Arts Festival. Enjoy the discussion and make sure to check out their films. Thank you, Warner Media, for supporting the creation of animation. We are really excited to announce that imagineNATIVE is festival partner for the Warner Media HBO Max animation program, and that applications are still open until 11:59 p.m. on October 24th.
Hi, my name is Luisa Alvarez Restrepo, and I lead all film festival initiatives for Warner Media Access Canada. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a Latin American woman with dark hair in a bun wearing a blue floral top. I am speaking to you from Takaranto, known as Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is also the current home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I invite you to take a moment to think of the lands that you are currently on and its traditional keepers of generations past, present, and to come. Here at Warner Media Access Canada, we are focused on creating opportunities for underrepresented Canadian talent in the film industry in above and below the line roles. Our programming includes a director's program, a writer's program, and vocational training in areas such as animation, virtual production, and hair and makeup. Most recently, we launched a unique partnership with imagineNATIVE for our inaugural HBO Max and Warner Media Access animated shorts program. We are proud to support imagineNATIVE, its industry programming, and the incredible breadth of Canadian talent that is showcased. If you'd like to learn more about Warner Media Access Canada, our initiatives, and how to get involved, please follow us on our social media channels.
I'm willing to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves.
Let's celebrate our right to exist and to exist with joy.
What's empowering is seeing yourself.
We see you and you're not alone.
This is gold standard.
Yes!
My main focus now is to take action.
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jamie Lee Reardon. I am Irish and Ojibwe from Flying Post First Nations. I'm the industry coordinator at imagineNATIVE, and we're here for a panel on the creation of animation. I have long brown hair, dark brown eyes, and I'm wearing glasses. I have fair skin, and I'm wearing a patterned blouse. In the background, there's a window and white walls. I will pass it over to Lindsay to do her introduction.
Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here. My name is Lindsay McIntyre. I am Invoke on my mom's side and Settler Scottish on my dad's side. And I live on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh. And I am joining you from my home in North Vancouver, or what is otherwise known as North Vancouver. I have a green sweater and a maroon dress, long brown hair, and really awesome earrings made by Phoebe Bentley of Montreal. There's art on the walls behind me, and it's a sort of cloudy day here in North Vancouver.
Thank you, Lindsay, and I'll pass it over to Terril.
Hi, my name is Terril Calder. I am Métis from Fort Frances, Ontario, originally. I'm now in Toronto. I'm 50. I have long brown hair. I'm wearing glasses. I'm wearing a ratty black t-shirt, and the sun is shining. I have some art in the backwards, some pictures my son made.
And Chris, we'll pass it over to you.
Hey, I'm Kristian Mercado. I'm rocking a psychedelic blue beanie that's tie-dye, some sunglasses. I just transferred from outdoors to indoors because my computer's bugging out, so I don't know what's going on. And I'm Puerto Rican on both sides, just Puerto Rican as hell. And I'm in an Airbnb, and it's mostly white in the background.
Great. Thank you so much for the introductions. How did you find your way into working with animation? And I'll pass it over to Terrell to start.
I just realized the other day, if somebody would have told me I was going to be an animator, I would have laughed at them because I didn't think I had enough patience to become an animator. And my background was in fine art, mostly performance art, because it could be over in one day. And I slowly got interested in the medium because it's something that you can build upon. You can kind of really suck at it at first and just make things move around. And then I think I've been doing this for about 10 years, and every film is a challenge to find something new to learn, challenge myself and to get better at. So it was kind of a gateway, moving image to actually understanding animation.
That's really cool. And like quite a journey to get to the animation portion of your career. Very happy that you did. And Lindsay, how about you?
Well, I've been making films for 20 years, and the first few films I made were actually animations. I didn't learn how to make film from anybody. I was a self-taught filmmaker. And so I started off, I did a bachelor's degree in painting and drawing, and animation was like a transition space, I guess, between the immediate mark on the page of drawing, which was an important part of my practice, and making those things moving in some way. So I learned animation mostly by failing and, trying to expose film wrong, doing animation, which is an extremely painful exercise. But a really good way to learn how not to do it again. And then I mostly moved away from animation. A lot of my films are experimental, documentary. I work with analog processes pretty heavily. But I'm realizing that a lot of those processes, because I'm working with my hands and actually some of the mechanisms that I'm doing, like the optical printer, for example, I use in a lot of my films, is essentially an animation machine. It's, you're photographing things frame by frame. And while it may not be the kind of traditional sort of telling of a story in an animated form, it is a form of animation. And so I think it's an underlying factor in a lot of the things that I do. I recently came back to animation proper in the last year over the pandemic. I'm working on the 5th film over the pandemic now, but 3 of them are animations. So I don't know why all of a sudden it's back, but it's really a fun space to be working in.
Yeah, that you've definitely stayed busy. 5 films during the pandemic. That's amazing. And Chris, how about you? How did you get into directing for animation?
Yeah, I kind of direct across mediums, so I kind of do a little bit of everything. But if I had to find an origin point, I think when I was a kid, there was I got Mario Paint. And so Mario Paint was just a really cheap, accessible way of making animation, when I was younger. Especially if you were coming from a household that didn't have the access to a computer, $60 versus thousands of dollars made it really accessible. So I kind of found my way there. I mean, I was always an illustrator. I was always drawing when I was a kid. And I think animation was just a big part of my formation as a person. I used to digest a lot of animation growing up along with film. As I kind of grew up, I think animation has always been kind of something I dabbled in or kind of played with a lot, when I went to school, wish I was doing more fine arts and media studies. All of it kind of came from an avant-garde art space, and so experimentation was just highly encouraged, and animation is just constantly an experimental space because you can kind of always redefine things or making something completely from scratch, with no real basis from reality otherwise, unless you wanted to, but you can kind of just play with the medium a lot. And so it's always been part of my discipline to dabble in animation and try to collide it and mix it with other things. So I'm always just kind of experimenting, and I like that animation is kind of a loose medium in some ways. I mean, it could be very strict in terms of execution sometimes, but I think when you can kind of keep it serendipitous, it's kind of a magical thing, and I kind of strive for that in animation as much as possible.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that. And there is a lot of mixed media in a lot of your work in the animation for all of you. There's with the different exposures and the different tools that you use and bring into your stop motion for Lindsay and Terril. I'm wondering, how experimental do you allow yourself to get with your ideas when you're creating animation? Do you have a boundary that you put up, or do you kind of just go all in and just let your brain take you wherever it's going to go? I'll pass that over to Lindsay first.
I'm a process oriented filmmaker. So all of my films come out of a process. They don't start with scripts. I start with an idea. And so in that sense, I'm experimenting as I go along, no matter what I'm doing. And often the process of the whatever sort of like writing there would be, and the production and the post-production, those are all kind of happening at the same time for me. So I'm often shooting and in the darkroom and coming up with new elements and putting all of those things together at the same time. And so it's a pretty messy process, but it keeps me engaged on all levels, and it allows me to respond to the material in a way that I feel like I wouldn't be able to otherwise if I was, starting out with like an outline or script and then choosing to move through things. But in animation, because animation is so much work, and particularly this film that is playing at imagineNATIVE, Ajihini looked out to good, We Are All Different. It's stop motion animation, but there's several layers of animation in it. And it's a really hard thing to, you can't just like generate a whole bunch of extra footage in animation and just be like, oh, I didn't need all of that, because it's painful to throw that away. But also, it just is a lot of labor. So you have to do a little bit more planning around the kinds of shots that you're trying to get. But I still engaged in those same processes of those elements happening at the same time. But it's probably, of the films I've made, less experimental than many of the others, because it really does sort of follow a trajectory because of the speakers that are speaking. And so, yeah, I don't know how to exactly answer that. I think it differs from film project to film project.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I love to hear about the different like unconventional ways artists and filmmakers go about in their projects. I think it lends to a lot of inspiration for up and coming filmmakers to know that there isn't one set, path that you have to follow to make your film, that you can branch out and try different things and, not follow the script necessarily. And being able to take that freedom to explore is really exciting and I'm sure can create a lot of like happy accidents.
Yeah, if there's a rule, I'm probably trying to break it somehow. And if there's a more difficult way to do something, I'm probably already also doing that. So there's something about like that labor and the work and like working through things and even making things difficult that is an important part of my practice. But it's definitely unconventional.
Yeah, that's really cool. Lots of learning opportunities. And what about you, Terril?
All of my, I don't have consistent, I think I do have a consistent style because I keep making things and they're like, oh, that's your work. But I always love learning. So any project I do, I want to do something I've never done before, and then that could go horribly wrong, because I'm kind of always in it for the process, like to learn something and to grow. And I do a lot of teaching with youth. And I think that, especially with an animation, like you define your aesthetic, you define the tools that you have accessible to you and you stick to them to tell your story. So you can do like anything, it's kind of amazing. And I was once doing this panel talk with another animator, and I was always really interested in using animation as a way to tell kind of like performance art meets film. So I always kind of embody my characters in the real world, which means they don't do anything super fantastical. And she was saying, well, animation is about magic. Why else would you animate if you didn't have this experiment with the idea of the unimaginable? And that really resonated with me in this, because I thought that was ridiculous when I first heard of it. No, that's ridiculous. You don't make animation to create magic. But she was absolutely right. And especially in this new film, my approach is, it's one set, one stop-mo play that's going on, but unimaginable like magic happens within that space, and anything that you can conceive of and experiment with and throw in, and if it holds water, it's cool and it's addictive. So I love experimentation. I don't think I could work in a big animation studio, because I'm kind of in it for that. To experiment and to learn.
So Chris, you worked with like many heavy hitters in from Cool Keith and MF Doom to Aquafina and doing really cool projects. So what is it like to get to work with people like that and get to experiment and use your creativity and push those boundaries in those kinds of settings?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think like in general, like I like figure out like things that are ownable to like certain thing, like aesthetics, like I always try to put a signature, but also like kind of be true to the voice of like whoever I'm working with at the time, I think when I got the opportunity to like work with Cool Keith and MF Doom, that was a really life-changing project for me, like where it kind of led to so much, you know, and I think someone else was talking about magic and like the animation, like the magic of animation. And I feel like that's so true. Like I think of, I don't know, I'm starting to like look at animation like as like incantations or spells, which is really crazy to think about, like where they're kind of like they summon something. Like with the MF Doom Cool Keith project, I think what I was doing was just like trying to like talk about like intersections of like multidimensionality and like this idea of just like the oneness of the universe, and that was kind of like a fun way to approach that. And I don't know, anytime I work with someone, I try to make it a collaboration. So like I kind of want to know like where their voice is coming from, and then like try to accentuate that or find some sort of visual language that kind of speaks to that. And I think a lot of people come to jam with me, and I always say jam, you know, like maybe because I like jam, you know, on toast, but also because I kind of look at it as a jamboree. Like you're kind of just creating something with somebody, and like I like the idea of making like a pirate ship, you know, of oddballs and like, you know, the outsiderness of it all. Like I think animation is like an inviting space for outsiders, you know, like, so I like having like untraditional people around that can kind of like find new languages and visuals. And then I encourage highly for people to push the boundaries of things. So like, I'm not looking to like chase a trend or an aesthetic, but more to establish new language as much as possible. And I mean, sometimes like, I feel like now it's become like where the work somehow has a signature because I've been doing it for a while and like people can identify it. But at the same time, I try to strive to find new things. And I think a lot of that comes from like investigating like not where the culture is, but where the culture is going. And I kind of like try to forecast as much as possible when I work. So like I look at it like sort of like what's the zeitgeist and what is the zeitgeist telling me? And going back to magic, the more synchronized you are with like the universe, then you can kind of almost listen to it. And then like you can kind of form like a bond with it. That sounds really trippy, but I think it's true. Like the more you listen, the more you can hear it. It's, you know, then it leads you to where you need to be. And I think just being able to be is like a practice that I'm trying to really focus on a lot in my life. And I think I take that practice into animation as well, like where just being present and being able to be can kind of allow you to find something. And I think with working with artists, sometimes that's a good thing to do, you know?
I'd like to hear about where your inspiration comes from for each of the projects that you guys have screening at imagineNATIVE this year. Lindsay, where did you find inspiration for your film, We Are All Different?
I guess it was a series of things. So mostly probably from my grandmother, who taught me about the idea of tunganaknak, which is sort of like the idea of being open and welcoming. Like welcoming people with open arms and being kind of grounded and bringing people into a space, your own space, and not excluding people. But also another thing that I have felt, and I've spoken to other Inuit about, there are sort of different ideas about belonging and what it means to belong. So that was one piece that I really wanted to explore, particularly for urban Inuit, and look at that from within and outside of community and what that means. And so the project morphed substantially as it was being made. It was made entirely during the pandemic and was designed to be something really quite a bit different, was a little bit more narrative and but had documentary elements like documentary audio, but narrative animation. And most of it became not possible to do because it all went down right at the very moment that pretty much across Canada, you weren't allowed to get together with a single other person from outside your own household anywhere in the country. And I was mentoring a couple of other Inuit artists through the process. And some of them were working locally here with me, and some of them were in other places. Jennifer Hopanome was working in Montreal. And so we ended up having to just completely change the way that we were approaching the subject matter. And we ended up doing it by doing interviews with Inuit. And once we started those conversations, the project just morphed completely because there were a lot of people who wanted to come to the table to talk about this topic. And there was so much incredible material that I wanted to include in terms of audio. Like this film was supposed to be like 5 minutes long and it's almost 17 minutes long. So it was really, really, there was a lot of stuff that I had to cut, but I wanted to honor the things that people were talking about. So the project became about what people were speaking about, and the animation sort of had to adapt to that in a way.
The interviews in your film, they stir up a lot of emotions. They're very strong and definitely something like very important to be shared. What was that process like for you to be able to connect with your community through these interviews in a time of isolation?
That was really wonderful. I think that across the board, the conversations were touching and connective, and it was always me and Jennifer and the interviewee, some joining us from Nunavut and some in other locations across Canada, but all of the interviews happened by Zoom. And so they were some of the more intimate Zoom conversations that I got to have over the course of the pandemic. Some of the sessions, like everybody cried, and we found a lot of really similar stories between the three of us that were involved in the conversations, almost every single time. And so it was really buoying, I guess, to know that our stories were so similar, despite, growing up in different places and having different trajectories through the world. And it made me realize there are some really important things that we hit upon that I think will be helpful for all Inuit to hear, whether or not they live in community or not anymore, and or find themselves feeling connected or disconnected from it. So I'm really proud of the piece and of the things that are discussed within that. But it was really wonderful to be a part of those discussions.
Yeah, that's really beautiful to get to connect that way and on that depth in such a time of isolation, for sure. I think that amplifies the importance of it. Let's dive into your inspiration for Nouveau Rico, Kristian.
It was we were kind of in the beginning of the pandemic. I had written a script that was a Cine Grant recipient called Mela, which was about reggaeton, pretty much. And I was really in this world of reggaeton, in my head, I was doing so much research and really diving in deep. And I think knowing that how the pandemic was going, I felt I wanted to just tackle something in animation, but kind of almost like a mixtape of some of the ideas I had for reggaeton. And so I kind of started thinking about it, and the first inception dream, because I woke up one day, whoa, I'm going to go make something. And that was kind of the energy of it. And it was almost fever dream-esque. And I was my first thought on it was two kids in Mecca's in Puerto Rico breaking a museum open to take back artifacts, and this idea of reclamation of culture and taking something that used to be yours and trying to reclaim it. And I think when I think about it a lot as a colonized person, I guess that's a lot of the work and spiritually, culturally, that sometimes we have to do is kind of investigating and trying to find our story in some ways. And I thought there was something really unique about telling something about our past and the future. I felt as we move into spaces in the future and who we are as a people, especially in Puerto Rico, or as Latinos too, I was just trying to figure out how much the past informs the present and the future. And I was really craving just to see people of color in the future in ways that are unconventional, because so often we don't see that. And I was a big fan of I'm just a big fan of cyberpunk, as a genre. And I think that while it's predominantly populated by white male authors, there's something that they nailed, which was the multiculturalness of the future. And Puerto Rico is such a transient cultural point. We were kind of in the middle of the slave trade. There was a lot of mixing happening. There's a lot of transitions happening. We have a really complex history. We have a complex relationship with the US. We have a complex relationship with a lot of things. And I was just really craving a way to explore that in a digestible, fun way. That sounds so crazy because those are heavy topics, but I don't know, something about feeding people medicine with sugar just kind of resonates. Just find a way to tell something truthful. And I think ultimately what I landed on was just like this idea of like telling a story of a brother and sister kind of like being torn apart by the existing kind of structure that we have, which is like highly capitalistic, and like doesn't favor, it doesn't favor community or family. It like favors individual. So I think that was like the seed of like where I was going with the story. Without telling too much about it, I feel like I just gave it away, but there's like that feeling of like those conflicts where like people are like money makes people funny, right? Like, materialism is kind of like a dangerous vein, and it's something I think a lot about because, I think I'm always at conflict with it. And I think like having grown up like broke as hell, you know what I mean? Like it's funny to be like sometimes exposed to like things like that contrast of like the wealth gap. And, I think class warfare is like a very real thing in America, right? Like, at the end of the day, it's like rich versus poor out here. And, I'm fascinated by how young talent, especially people of color, enter these spaces and are trusted into like vast wealth when they were starting off like from poverty, like you see that story constantly in the hip hop and reggaeton spaces, and like that's such a contrast, and I'm always fascinated by it.
Yeah, that is definitely like speaking truths into the future from experiences that are happening now and before us, which is really cool. I very much enjoy Nuevo Rico. I think I've watched a couple times now, so I can't wait to see it again. And the audience, you could screen all of these films during imagineNATIVE, so don't forget to check them all out. Terril, Beneath the Hidden Island of Ethics, feels very personal. Could you shed light on where the inspiration came from for you for this film?
Beneath, the word is means island in Anishinaabe, and I don't spell it the proper way. I kind of spell it like beneath. I was thinking about making an AR project, augmented reality project, and I wanted to make something with a hidden truth. And it's been like, like artists, we have 1,000 ideas, but it's always kind of on the back burner, different ideas. And I wanted to do a film, which was huge and difficult, talking about ethics, code switching. And I think like it occurred to me, like a lot of people don't understand even like in the need for equity, like we always need to have, let's make a diverse group of people come together, that even when those people come together, there's more accommodations that we need to even be there in the first place, because the culture doesn't allow or doesn't recognize anything beyond, Christian ethics, because I think it's like almost the basis of colonialism, that the two, especially in Canada, that's always kind of the go-to, that's the system that we base everything on. And if you don't fall within those ethics, that somehow you're wrong or you need to change or, will help you fit in. And I spent a long time since living in my community, especially because I look white, people are always like, here, if you just do this, then you'll fit in, and I don't know. So I've always like struggled trying to figure out who I was within all that stuff. But it took me a long time, like, equity is awesome, but I think that you really have to examine beyond that our systems need to change. And then I saw this amazing talk by Willie Ermine, and he just talks about Indigenous ethical spaces that he brings to universities. So it's like places of respite from all that stuff. Like you can actually just go and hang out without making that constant accommodation to fit into something that takes effort. So I wanted to make this extremely didactic film, and I thought, well, it needs to have a heart, because no one's going to watch this film without a heart. So it's a journey about a young girl who can take on all of these, take on a slippery slope of talking about Christianity and spiritualism, kind of through her point of view. And it's a story about her recovering from trauma through her own cultural teachings. Yeah, there's a lot. It's 3 years of thinking so much. And so at imagineNATIVE will be the single channel film, and we're still working on the AR version, which will follow, where one of the characters is hidden.
I'd like to speak about how those overarching themes of colonization, displacement, and belonging impact your storytelling as artists. Chris, would you like to dive into that one first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Puerto Ricans are like one of the oldest colonies, like we've had mostly colonial experience. It was, the Caribbean in general was just like a group of islands at some point, right? It was like mostly Tainos. Then we experienced like this violent act of colonization. We become kind of like an Afro-Latino mix, like like Caribbean mix, right? And so I think it felt like with Nuevo Rico, I was really trying to highlight that. I mean, I think like a lot of times I try to evoke I think a lot about like my ancestors, and I think a lot about like who we were and like what we are. And I think a lot about how to keep things alive, I think, because like colonization doesn't have to define our experience. I think like I've been struggling a lot. I think Latino identity is like so complicated, and it's like, but I think like more as I get older, I start to think about like how whiteness is kind of like this act of violence that was perpetuated upon a people. You know what I'm saying? And like that was colonization essentially, and like I think you can't strip that from us, because that is kind of our experience, but I don't want our experience to be defined by that violence. So I find a lot of hope and a lot of magic, in exploring like our Afro-Indigenous roots as much as possible and trying to stay true to that. And sometimes now I kind of look at it more like this idea of surviving. Like Puerto Ricans are survivors, like we survive a lot, like we are constantly like under attack or under some duress, and I think like a lot of people, I think recently saw that with Hurricane Maria for sure, like but that's not like the first time, it won't probably be the last time, really. Like we're always kind of like under attack and second-class citizens in our own land, and like, as time progresses, we can look at Hawaii as kind of like the model for like what Puerto Rico's sort of heading towards, and like, that's always a scary thought about being displaced from your own land, so I don't know. I try to preserve as much as possible our experience and our culture. And like when I was making Nuevo Rico, it was about like this idea of connecting to the old voices and trying to like, and then in a way it's kind of like, I feel like just because you've been displaced, your voice is still sort of like the extension of that, right? Like your voice now, whatever has survived, is kind of an extension of those veins. So like, I think a lot about my grandfather who passed away, like he died during the hurricane. And that was kind of like horrible. It was like a life-altering experience for me. And it's a trauma I have to live with all the time. And the way I evoke that through my art and like through the work I do is that I kind of like realize that those of us who survived speak for those who passed, And I think that's kind of like how I look at it when I think about colonization in Nuevo Rico. Like those of us who survive can kind of continue the story somehow, because we're the remnants of what has lived, and that's been kind of my more new perspective on it, I guess.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Chris. The legacy, that lives on throughout each and every voice that carries on the stories and keeps them alive and keeps them, for future generations to know what happened and what we've all been through is really important.
Yeah, totally. I think like Western culture obviously doesn't like value oral tradition as much, it's always been like written tradition that's kind of like more valued. And so like I think like in our dreams and in our work, that's kind of like an extension of kind of like the oral like tradition in some ways, and that's what I've been trying to like evoke.
Lindsay, I feel like you've touched on this already in your previous answer, in some of the previous answers about displacement and belonging and colonization and how that impacts your storytelling. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on?
Sure. I think it's a huge question, and it's a really important one. For me, it's really important to honor the stories of the people who came before me. And in many ways, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to bridge gaps in collective experience. And I do work a lot with personal histories and the way in which those things have translated down, be that through intergenerational trauma or even like a biological kind of a thing. And I feel the same thing, that many of, the things that inspire me and the way that I even work through things comes from my grandmother and beyond. And there's been a lot of displacement in my family of different kinds, and traumas that are very, very direct colonial violences. But not in every case, there wasn't always somebody who had a voice, who could have said something or done something about it. And I feel like it's my duty as an artist and as a human being, as a daughter, as a granddaughter, to use the voice that I have to try to right some of those colonial wrongs and to reimagine some of those histories and situate them in a space that is healing for people and brings us into the future in a better way. Colonialism isn't something that happened in the past; it's happening, and there are so many current contemporary violences and issues that are happening all across the North and to Inuit everywhere. I really want to shed light on and do something about. So I try to use my voice, to do those things as much as I can, despite being a perfect postcard for colonization. Really, it's a difficult space to work in, but I think it's stories that we need to hear and we need to work through in order to get to better places. Like I know that sometimes there are these discussions that happen about trauma porn, or the idea of just like working through things, revisiting these horrible things, and sometimes you'll hear people say like, "We'll get over it," or we need to focus on the positive things, the beautiful things, the future, the moving forward things. But in the place that I am on my journey is kind of working through both of those things at the same time. I make all of my work as a way to process the things that I'm dealing with and that I'm thinking about. And it's cathartic for me. Like, it's something that I have to do. And sometimes those experiences resonate with other people as well. And that's something that's really important to me, but it's where I am in my process to be working through this material right now.
It's so important to regain control of the narrative and make sure that it's rooted in truth, rooted in a storytelling manner in a good way.
I think all of my films sort of touch upon all of those things. I've been living away from my community for a long time. I'm one of very few people in my family that have left. I'm a bit of a oddball in that regard. My films always come from truths, whatever I'm kind of thinking or what resonates with me, or like an idea or something like that. So it's always sort of baked into that, how do I feel about where I live and the path that I've taken to be an artist. And this film, unlike any other film I've ever made, I think directly wants, instead of the viewer being told, well, colonization or missionary thinking or these systems, what it does to me, to get them to feel it, so it's sort of like an experience, offering a different lens or perspective. And to me, just for pre-screeners, people have said to me, I never thought about that before. To me, I never make a film that has answers. Like, I don't have the answers. I think my films just ask questions. And I think that's really important, because I think a lot of people keep looking for the dialogue, the right dialogue. But to me, I want a bigger change. I want the right thinking behind the words. Making this film was like almost an impossible task. Of how do you teach the colonizers that they're colonizers? How do you teach them, what missionary thinking is, what that imposition feels like? That, because it always comes, it's the right way, it's the good way, the proper way. But giving someone, the knowledge of that there's so many ways, not just being told it, but to feel it.
So I guess I'm going to go into a little bit of one-on-one questions. So for Nuevo Rico is a very bright and fun to watch film, but it carries like a darker kind of storyline into it. The soundtrack plays an important role in communicating to the audience what I think you're trying to get across in the film. And I'd like to kind of dive into a deeper level, like how the viewer is to understand the film. Like, can you speak to how you found the sound and how you collaborated with that process?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think music was part of the storytelling of it, because I felt like, in a way, I think I was trying to find out like what a modern musical is too, to some degree. Like, not like in a Broadway Disney-esque way, but like, how can you do storytelling and music in a dynamic, powerful way? And I was just like, I'm so fascinated by reggaeton. Like, I love reggaeton. Like, it's such a fusion. Like, it's such a fusion that can only happen like in a place like Puerto Rico, because of the just the mixture of things that are happening with reggaeton. And And it's such a cultural force too, but there's not like any cinematic language attached to it yet. And so I was really hungry to like start attaching like a cinematic language to it, you know? And so I think we project and like telegraph story beats through the music. Like we were using a lot of foreshadowing. I think the music also tells you why you care about the characters. Like it's like their magic skill, like it's their special skill. Like you can find a accessible point where you see, oh, they're really good, but they're not known. And it tells you a lot about their way. And then I think like the process of making it was really a lot of outreach and like finding, I mean, we used a lot of dembow, like and Afro-Caribbean tones for it, you know, because that is kind of like part of what reggaeton is. And basically we found two reggaetoneras who were like kind of pretty unknown, but they just have like an incredible amount of talent right now, and Pamela La Furia. And so we kind of like, I gave them like prompts. Like one of them was like, you know, tell their story, right? And we gave them like kind of an outline of what the story beat was, and they created a story that kind of surrounded their struggle. And then like the other one was way more intense, where I was like, make me a reggaeton lullaby and make it like as if it's like La Cuna del Diablo, which is like the devil's cradle, which is super intense. And that ends up being our like ending theme. And I kind of wanted something that felt somber and slower for that. And the general like tonalities and beat, I just kind of wanted to feel electric, like it's constantly moving you forward and like kind of living in this experimental kind of reggaeton space, because I kind of was also trying to imagine what like reggaeton constantly mixing in the future and becomes like fusions with other genres. And so we were trying to like really kind of get like a dynamic soundtrack that helps move the story forward. And it was a collaborative process all the way through. Like we were just having fun making music, really.
I would like to hear more from you, Lindsay, about the collaborative nature of the cell scratching that you do in your work. I think that is really, really interesting. And yeah, I totally was blown away when I started to look into that, into your process.
Mm-hmm. It is. Remember when I said that I like to make things difficult for myself? This is like that. Basically what I did. So the film is it's an analog digital kind of mix on a number of different levels. So the first stage of it was pretty straight up stop motion animation with these antique wind up bears. And one of them has no hair, and he's kind of like my main character. They're from like the 1940s. And they were just very evocative things. They're really terrible animation tools because they don't articulate very well, but I was like obsessed with these things. And so they were my characters moving through this landscape that I created. And so the stop motion animation was shot on Super 16 on color reversal film in my studio and hand processed. Then that footage was scanned so that I had a digital version of that footage. And I edited the footage down and exported individual images. So if I took like a sequence of like a 10-second sequence, export every second frame. But that was an editing process where I was like, okay, I know I don't need this part of this shot, and I know I don't need this part of this shot. So I'm already kind of discarding components of animation. And then I went through a long process of like figuring out how to get those images onto an image that I could then scratch. So physically scratching the cells. And the most rewarding of the processes that I came up with was to actually print them onto photographic, like with real emulsion color photos. But it was cost prohibitive at the time. And it was like more than $1 per image because I needed them to be a fair amount of size for a canvas that I could actually scratch on. So I ended up doing them via a digital printing method onto transparencies. And so these transparencies were incredibly satisfying, let's say, to scratch. And I was using, different kinds of scratching tools like this, and just wetting it wasn't really an emulsion, but it was a little bit like an emulsion, and scratching into that, back to that, down to like the clear base, or using chemicals on it to sort of like weaken the layers. And, with the numbered cells, I would have hundreds and hundreds of these, but each set of them was kind of like a different shot in a way. And I was like, so this is the shot of the bear walking through the space. This is the shot of something else happening. And so I was able to collaborate both with the Inuit mentees that I was working with through the Inuit Futures Project. And also with other artists, local artists, other Emily Carr students that I was mentoring as well. Some people that I like actually hired to help do some of these cells, some really talented local artists here, as well as even my daughter, who was 7 at the time, was scratching some of the cells. And so that was really wonderful to be able to incorporate all of those different ways of thinking about altering an environment and incorporate them into the animation. So that was my favorite part of it. It was the part that I wish that I could have spent a whole lot more on. In the beginning, I wanted the entire film to be hand scratched cells that had already been sort of previously animated. And then there's also a component where I'm shooting those cells under camera, so more like under camera animation, but I also did some things with like oil pastels and stuff. But I'm also altering the way in which they've been captured. So it's not just straight animation, but there are things that are happening, an animation process that's happening in the under camera animation too. So there's like 3 or 4 different layers of animation happening at once. But in the end, I think probably only about 20% of the film really has that really juicy kind of like hand scratched cell animation on it. So maybe I'll find a year or 2 of my time that I can spend doing a whole project that's all cells, but really fun to collaborate with people on that for sure.
I imagine you would need multiple years to do that. And I think it's so cool for every single scratcher that got to take part in all of the cell scratching for your film to get to now see this project on like big screens and get to watch it all over the place, knowing that they literally had a hand in making it become what it is. That's super neat.
And I have process videos. If you want, I can send them if they're helpful. You can sort of like see how that actually worked, what was happening when those different stages were happening.
And Terrell, the characters and sets in your animation are quite literally molded by your hands to become your vision. Can you walk us through the process from the idea of a character in your brain to a complete doll that you create? Because there's so much, I feel like they're birthed into this character filled with life and emotion. And yeah, they're just really, really detailed. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your process.
So I usually have a character in my mind. So sometimes I start drawing it over and over again, the sort of doodles and sketches, or sometimes I just go right to clay. It's called Monster Maker's clay. It's like the soft sculpting clay. So I make the size of the character, but I usually have to put the eyes in, or it doesn't feel like it's alive to me unless it has eyeballs. So I put the eyeballs in, and it's staring at me, and then it forces me to see it. It's like you have to make me the character. Especially in this last film, the baby girl had to be so specifically interesting, I guess, because all the other characters are flat and made of paper. So that sculpt took a lot of time, and it's usually just trial and error, just pushing stuff around until I get the character that I want. I don't have any clay, but what I do have is skin. So after I sculpt the doll, I make a 2-part mold out of gypsum plaster, and I'll send you pictures. So you do one half and you do the other half, and you break the mold open and you get rid of the clay. And then I pour into it. I started experimenting early in my career. I used silicone rubber that was traditionally used for prosthetics in film. So it looks like skin. So it makes it look really creepy. I think one woman that did a review early in my film said they look like boiled babies, which I kind of liked. So then once I get them out of the mold, this is not the baby girl, obviously. It's a different doll I was working on. I'll get this kind of skin, and it's not usually perfect. And then I'll go in, because I used to skin moose. So I know how to actually like carefully take out the flesh from the inside so that I get it like a perfect skin. And then it usually goes over armature, which I made myself in the last production. I did it with the NFB. So more people were involved than I normally work with. And there was a great armature maker. For some actually had a professional armature made specifically for the character. And those become the bones of the doll. Then I designed a costume. But this new film, which I really love, is I've been airbrushing my dolls and painting them, because it adds like more believable flesh, adding the blue tones and the red tones and, the details. And then I punch hair into them. It's usually mohair. And then add wires in their jaws so they can have expressions and be emote if they need to. And I normally, in Beneath and a lot of, all the films are always different, but usually I have paint on eyebrows because you can get a lot of expression just by painting those differently depending on what the scene is, or if they need to change like a little bit. And then my sets, I kind of had in mind what I wanted to build and to make for the stage. And if anyone's building a set, I would strongly suggest that you set up your camera because it's a great tool to see what it's going to look like on film. I think the hardest part being a visual artist and then going into film is that everything is going to be two-dimensional eventually. You're going to have to see it on film. It's going to be flat. So, take pictures of your dolls, take pictures, lots of pictures, because it's going to give you a really good sense of how it's going to film, like costumes and sets and everything. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's so cool. I would have never guessed in a million years that your hide tanning lends to the creation of the dolls. I think like that's going to stick with me. I think that's so cool. And like, yeah, just really neat. And tanning a hide is super hard work. I know I've only done it twice in my life. It's something I'd love to try doing more, but skinning. Oh, wow.
No, I tried tanning a hide once and I'm not good at it at all. I don't have the patience, which is funny. I'm an animator. I don't know. It's a lot of work.
What are some of the changes that you hope to invoke with your filmmaking? And I'll pass that over to you first, Lindsay.
I'm a filmmaker and an artist, and I'm usually just choosing the best, medium to express whatever it is that I'm working through. I think that if I can speak maybe more broadly to that in an Indigenous context, rather than maybe like specifically animation, I would say that there's a huge tidal wave of Indigenous creators coming forward, as we see every year at the imagineNATIVE Film Festival and elsewhere, that are redefining the ways in which we look at screen-based media and the kinds of things that we can do with it. And I'm really excited to see that space be cracked open finally in a way. It is a colonized space, but it's becoming a space where we really belong. And I think we're taking the reins and changing it completely. And it's really amazing to see something that like hasn't happened in the 150 years of cinema's history. And I think, other spaces like, VR, AR, and these other kinds of spaces, those are not spaces that are already colonized. Those are spaces that we own in a way and are really masterfully changing the way that people are interacting with things. So it's an exciting time to be a filmmaker. And I think there are so many more amazing things to come. I don't think that we've imagined everything that there is to imagine yet.
What are some of the changes you hope to invoke with your filmmaking, Chris?
Oh, I mean, I think with animation or just in general with cinema, it's like, I think it's just allowing space for other people to kind of create things, like I think so much of it has been dominated by like a monoculture that like, it's just like literally trying to like change the infrastructure to allow other voices to exist, because it's just, I think that's a complicated process too. I mean, like, it's not like, you gotta, it's like fundamentally changing so much, like you have to kind of introduce new people, new voices, new talents. I think a lot of what I see infrastructurally sometimes is like, and this is just what I've learned in recent history, like it's that a lot of things are just a betting system within entertainment, I guess, if you want to call it that, or arts, like where it's like the question that comes up, have they done it before? But then like, if no one brings the opportunity, then no one could do it before, you know what I mean? And that's kind of like a chicken versus the egg kind of problem, right? Like where like, if it's all based on vetting, then like, you're not really creating space for new voices to exist. And, what I've discovered is that sometimes the new voices are just way fresher. They have more like life experience. They have more, we have to, I think, challenge the idea that traditional academic kind of procedures are the only way that we can kind of like introduce talent, because like what I think, I see it all the time. It's like, oh, this person went to Yale and that's like a vetting system. And then like, oh, this person went to Columbia, this person went to NYU, but then like, that doesn't really allow space for like people who had different untraditional backgrounds to exist in these spaces, And so like, I think we have to challenge the notion of like, there just being like one way, singular way that it works, right? Like, oh, this person worked at as an intern at this place at Cartoon Network, and that allowed them to move up the ranks and all that. Like, people who have different experiences should have some space to kind of create as well and like find their voice. And like, the more we can kind of create infrastructure for that, the better, because then we'll be able to like actually introduce new voices, And so I think a lot of the work I'm doing personally is just trying to like give opportunity. Like, I think like one of the examples in Nuevo Rico that I can point to is our character designer. She's dope, Angelica. She's just such a powerful Boricua illustrator, animator, multi-talented person. And like, the way we were introduced to each other was that I was kind of like following her body of work when she was really young. And then I had all these like gigs with like Adult Swim. And then I started having her work on those gigs. And that led to her working as a character designer for like multiple studios and other places. And so like, I think when you have the opportunity to give opportunity, you need to do that, because then that kind of cements that process of someone being vetted, And so I think the more we can kind of, it's challenging because some of us who are like fighting for that are also struggling to get the opportunities. So like, it's not completely all on us, you know what I mean? Like, I think sometimes these changes have to become infrastructural changes, Like I talk a lot about infrastructure because I think those are the gateways and the systems that allow for people to do things, and across mediums, and that's just how it works, I feel, in my experience. So I think the more we can kind of challenge those systems and not completely just abide by them as like, oh, like by rote, like, oh, that's how it works, and actually question it, like, I think people should always question authority and like systems as much as possible, even though we live in America. So the squeaky wheel usually gets outcasted, right? Like we demonize truth tellers all the time, like we don't want them around because then it's like, oh, this person might get me fired or something. So I don't know. I don't have the answer. I'm just trying to figure it out myself.
Yeah, and I mean, I think working with like up and coming artists and doing those kinds of things are helping evoke the change, because it's giving them the platform and giving them that space that now, like you said, there were situations where you had to be vetted into. But people know, like, they get to see their talent when they get to work alongside somebody who's getting audiences like Adult Swim to see their work. It's I think an important thing to do for sure.
100%.
Yeah, totally. And Terrell, what about you? What are some of the changes you hope to invoke with your filmmaking?
Wow. I finished a course in 3D animation at a time, a long time ago, and nobody would hire me. And I was like, I'll show you, I'll make a film and I'll do well. And me and the industry have had a fight for like a long, long time. And it's only been recently, and everyone's like, you've been hiding under a rock. I think you need to be determined. I think you need to believe in yourself. I think you need to figure out your own stuff. I think Indigenous people, youth coming up, we have purpose, we have talent, we support artists, we grow artists, we just need the tools. Personally, I love teaching. I think there's always a responsibility to always give back. I go into community because I think animation is so accessible and there's not one right way to do it. And I think there's lots of invention to be had, and any tools that you have around you, can go into making some kind of film, even a 2-minute film, get into a festival, that starts getting into imagineNATIVE, you start a journey into something that you're passionate about, and then you can just keep learning as you go. I think it's really, really, really important to just, look at everyone on this panel. It's amazing what everyone's doing. And I think that in itself, when I was a kid, there wasn't that, it's a beautiful thing that's happening, and it just gives people, instead of having to be pioneers, a path, right? That you just say, I'm going to be that, I'm going to do that kind of thing. How do I get there? And filmmaking and animation is like so accessible nowadays. I actually, during COVID, when it first hit, I couldn't work on my own projects. I have so many projects, and I'm like, shit, I got to do something. And I made a series of videos for youth who are at home bored. And so if you want to learn animation, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to break it down. You can make it for under $20, just start figuring it out. And usually it's funny, I've taught city kids and I've taught kids in community, and the kids in community, they always feel like, we've got nothing. We've got nothing to do or to share. And I'm thinking, no, you're bored. And I remember what it felt like being really bored growing up. And you don't realize what an incredible gift that is to entertain yourself, and those kids need a good way to entertain themselves, because as we know, there's lots of other ways to entertain yourself too. So there's always that responsibility with making, all Indigenous artists, whether you're like an animator or a filmmaker, we have responsibilities. And I hope that if some kid can say, oh, that dork can do it, I hope they think they can too.
That's a good way of thinking about it. I want to add something there. I think that you hit on some really important things, both of you, about the idea of mentorship, or the idea of, helping other Indigenous artists through this. And I like I said, I think I said at the beginning, I've been making films for 20 years, but I used to think like, well, I need to be an expert first before I then teach other people. And even though my job is to teach people, and, I'm constantly sharing the information I have, and I'm forcing people to learn the things that I'm trying to find people who want the information that I have. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't share the information that I have. But I also have begun in the last few years, building in mentorships into every project I do, no matter how small it is, so that there's an artist or an Indigenous mentee who is learning alongside me. And I used to think well, my process is so messy. How could I possibly bring somebody into this? I'm inventing it as I go. And how is that going to be a useful experience for them? But as a person who has learned pretty much everything I know based on the goodwill of other people who are willing to, show me, or, as I struggled through it and was supported by other people, I realized it's just so important to hold open the door for people as I walk through it, not when I'm sitting on the other side in a cushy chair and then, people come see me. It's not like that. So I've started doing that in every project, no matter how small. And it's been really, really rewarding to do. So just encourage everybody and anybody listening to do those same things. And, hit me up if you want to learn any of the weird stuff that I do.
I think that's so beautiful how you said that, holding the door open while you walk through it. I think that is a really great message. And I think that is totally something that all Indigenous artists should be doing, because there's so much talent in every single Indigenous community. It's just overwhelming to see. And it's really exciting and really inspiring. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today, for viewing this panel. And I want to thank the panelists for coming on. Thank you all for coming. And I look forward to seeing all of the future projects that you guys have. And I look forward to watching all of the projects that you have screening at imagineNATIVE this year. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us here today for this conversation. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Ublukut, tulugartuk aliak mugama, kangaslinak, nunavun mi dalyunga. Koyin nami, the imagineNATIVE Film and Media Arts Festival mi, ilauti taugun nagama. Good day. My name is Tulugartuk Aliak. I am from Rankin Inlet, Nunavut. Thank you to the imagineNATIVE Film and Media Arts Festival for having me participate in your event. Now let's stir things up a little bit. I'm gonna let you know what excites me about Indigenous film and television, as if I'm performing for one of your movies. Let's get real stoic. The food, the clothing, the language that is shared between each culture gives a good and important representation to the non-Indigenous community. Hey, let's get real professional now. Our unique Indigenous humor took us generations for us to enjoy. Therefore, it is healing to us, which took trust for us to share with the world. So let us be happy. We earned it. Let's get real rugged now. This place is overcrowded. Hi. Oh, hey. What's up? Would you be able to tell us what excites you about Indigenous film and television? Yeah? You gonna give me a smoke? No. How about $5? $5? Done. Okay, through Indigenous film, we are now able to have a voice, which gives us the ability to show what was silenced before. and the future narrative sovereignty on screen within the Indigenous community will show the truth and the strength of our people. You make me proud. Okay, are we done? Yeah? I got my $5. Here you go. Back to your regular programming. On behalf of the Inuit Nation, I would like to say thank you to the Indigenous actors for paving the way for the future generations to come. Hoyanamik.